She was 7 years old, wearing a pink backpack, and she had already packed her own suitcase. Not because anyone told her to, but because Arya Bennett had learned, in the hardest way a child can learn anything, that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the very ones you need to run from. The penthouse smelled like money and bad decisions. That was the only way Arya could describe it, though she wouldn't have used those exact words because she was 7 and her vocabulary, while impressive for her age, had not yet expanded to include existential irony. She would have said it smelled like the inside of a fancy car, clean and cold and belonging to someone else, which was accurate. Everything in this place belonged to someone else. The marble floors, the floor-to-ceiling windows bleeding blue city light, the roses in the crystal vase that nobody ever touched. All of it belonged to Park Seo-jin, and Arya was beginning to understand, with the quiet clarity that grief gives to children far too early, that she did not. She had been in Seoul for 4 months, 2 weeks, and she checked the glow of the microwave clock. Approximately 6 hours since the last time someone had remembered to feed her dinner. Back in Atlanta, Aunt Renee forgot dinner sometimes too. But Aunt Renee made up for it with cereal, loud laughter, and a couch that smelled like the coconut oil her mother used to use. Forgetting felt different when it came wrapped in love. Here it just felt like what it was. Arya had come to the kitchen for water. That was all. She was not looking for trouble. She was not, as Choi Yuna had suggested on 3 separate occasions, trying to start something. She was thirsty. She was 7. These were not complicated facts. She had padded in on bare feet, her braids half unraveled from sleep. Simone Bennett's old, oversized Atlanta Braves t-shirt hanging past her knees, and she had found Yuna standing at the kitchen island with a glass of red wine and the particular expression of a woman who had been waiting for an excuse. Yuna was beautiful the way expensive things are beautiful, precisely, deliberately, and with an unspoken warning not to touch. She had cheekbones that could file documents and a wardrobe that cost more than Aunt Renee's car. For 2 years, she had been the most important woman in Seo-jin's penthouse. For 4 months, she had been watching that status quietly renegotiated by a second grader with a cartoon backpack, and the renegotiation had not been going in her favor. "Why are you still up?" Yuna asked. In Korean. She always spoke in Korean to Arya, which they both understood was less about communication and more about reminding Arya where she didn't belong. Arya went to the cabinet for a glass. "Thirsty. You should be asleep." "I know." Arya filled her glass at the sink, turned around. And because she was Simone Bennett's daughter and Simone Bennett had raised her to notice things and say true things even when true things were inconvenient, she looked at the empty space on the kitchen counter where her mother's photograph used to sit before it migrated to the living room console table before it migrated again, as of yesterday, to somewhere unknown, and she said, "Did you move my mom's picture again?" The question landed in the kitchen like a fork dropped on marble. Yuna set her wine glass down. "Arya," a warning dressed in silk. "It was on the console table. Now it's gone." Arya looked directly at her. "That's my mom. This is my home. It's my dad's home." It was the wrong thing to say. Arya knew it the second it left her mouth. Not because it wasn't true, but because truth, she was learning, had terrible timing. Yuna moved around the island faster than Arya had ever seen her move, and then the sound came, sharp, flat, final. And Arya's cheek was on fire and the glass of water was somehow still in her hand and the kitchen was completely silent. Arya did not cry. She was Simone Bennett's daughter. She did not cry in front of people who wanted to see it. She set the glass down carefully on the counter. She walked out of the kitchen. She went to her room, pulled her suitcase from under the bed, put her backpack on her shoulders, and she walked to her father's study door. She knocked, and when Park Seo-jin opened it, whiskey in hand, she looked up at the tattooed stranger who was supposed to be her father and said the words she had been holding back for 4 months. "Please, just take me back. I want to go home." Park Seo-jin had, in his 36 years on Earth, faced situations that would make grown men reconsider their life choices at a cellular level. He had stared down rival syndicate bosses across negotiating tables. He had walked out of a burning warehouse in Busan with nothing but a bruised rib and a mild inconvenience. He had once sat through a 4-hour dinner with his father without blinking. None of that had prepared him for this. A 7-year-old girl, pink backpack, rolling suitcase, eyes that looked exactly like his, which was the most unsettling part, biologically speaking, filled not with tears but with something far more dangerous. Certainty. The kind of certainty that only children and generals possess, because neither group has learned to be politely dishonest about what they want. Please, just take me back. I want to go home. Seojin stared at her for a moment that lasted approximately 3 business days. Behind her, he could see Choi Yuna standing at the edge of the living room, arms folded, expression arranged into something that was trying very hard to be innocent and arriving, instead, at a reasonable imitation of a woman who had absolutely not just slapped a child and was prepared to dispute any evidence to the contrary. The red mark on Arya's cheek told a different story. Told the story loudly. With footnotes, Seojin set his whiskey glass down on the desk behind him. This was not a decision he made consciously. His hand simply put the glass down because his hand understood, before his brain had fully caught up, that whatever happened next required both hands free and a completely clear head. He looked at Yuna. Yuna looked back at him with the smile, the one that had 17 meanings, and selected, unwisely, the meaning that suggested this is a misunderstanding and also the child is dramatic. Seojin's expression did not change. This was more terrifying than if it had. The men who worked for him had a saying. When Seojin's face goes still, leave the building. Preferably via the stairs. Do not wait for the elevator. Yuna did not know this saying. This was, in retrospect, her most significant strategic failure. She provoked me, Yuna said, in Korean, smooth and unhurried. She's been provoking me for weeks, Seojin. You don't see it because... Get out. 2 words. Quiet as a closed door. Yuna blinked. Excuse me? I will not repeat myself. Now, here is the thing about Choi Yuna. She was not, by nature, a woman who accepted instructions from anyone without at least a brief negotiation. She had successfully renegotiated her position in this penthouse on at least 4 prior occasions. She had the emotional intelligence of a chess grandmaster and the patience of someone who understood that the best time to argue with a powerful man was when he was calm, not when his jaw was doing the thing it was currently doing. Unfortunately, she chose this moment to attempt negotiation anyway. You're overreacting. She's a child who, Yuna, doesn't understand boundaries, and if you would just, Yuna, listen for 1 moment instead of, if you say 1 more word in this room, Seojin said, still quiet, I will have Taeyong pack your things. He is not gentle with silk. Yuna closed her mouth. She opened it again, old habits, and then she looked at his face properly for the first time since he had walked out of the study, and she closed it again. Permanently, or at least for the evening. She left before sunrise. 3 bags. No goodbye. The roses in the crystal vase watched her go without comment, which was more grace than she deserved. Seojin turned back to Arya. Arya was watching all of this with the focused attention of someone watching a nature documentary about a species she did not fully understand but found genuinely educational. When Yuna's heels finally disappeared down the hallway, Arya looked up at Seojin and said, with complete sincerity, is she coming back? No. Arya considered this. Okay. Then, she moved my mom's picture 3 times. I know. 3 times is a lot. It is. The last time she put it in the drawer with the takeout menus. Arya's tone carried the specific gravity of a child delivering a war crimes report. My mom was next to a pizza flyer. Seojin said nothing, but something moved across his face, brief, involuntary, that might, in different lighting, have been the beginning of a man remembering that he was capable of feeling things. He crouched down to her level. Are you hungry? Arya looked at him. You already asked me that. Last time. Last time you didn't answer. She thought about this seriously, the way she thought about most things. Cereal, she said finally. If you have cereal. He stood, walked to the kitchen, opened 3 cabinets before admitting internally that he had absolutely no idea what he kept in his own kitchen because he had a chef who handled Tuesdays through Sundays and he personally handled nothing. The 4th cabinet had cereal, a brand he did not recognize, with a cartoon tiger on the box, which his housekeeper had apparently purchased at some point with Arya's existence in mind. He poured it. He found milk. He set the bowl on the kitchen island. Arya climbed onto the stool, backpack still on her shoulders, and ate cereal at 2 in the morning in a Seoul penthouse while her father, who ran 6 criminal operations across 3 districts and had never once in his adult life felt uncertain, stood across the island and had absolutely no idea what to do with his hands. You can sit down, Arya said, without looking up from her bowl. I don't bite, he said. The morning after Choi Yuna's dramatic exit, Park Seo-jin's penthouse was quieter than it had ever been. Not peaceful quiet, accountable quiet, the kind of quiet that sits in a room after something important has happened and refuses to pretend otherwise. Seo-jin had not slept. This was not unusual. He frequently did not sleep. What was unusual was the reason. Normally, sleeplessness came with spreadsheets, syndicate logistics, and the occasional international wire transfer that required his personal authorization at 3 in the morning. Tonight, this morning, it came because a 7-year-old had fallen asleep at his kitchen island, face down, 2 centimeters from an empty cereal bowl, backpack still strapped to her small shoulders like she was ready to evacuate at a moment's notice. He had stood there for 4 full minutes deciding what to do about this. He was a man who made decisions for a living. Life-altering decisions. Decisions with consequences that rippled through organizations and across borders. And he had stood in his own kitchen for 4 minutes, completely paralyzed, because he was not sure if he was supposed to pick her up or wake her gently or simply place a blanket around her where she sat and let her sleep on the island like a very small, exhausted lighthouse. He had called Kang Taeyong. Taeyong was his second in command, his most trusted lieutenant. A man who had been shot twice and stabbed once and had described all 3 experiences as mildly inconvenient. He was 34 years old, broadly built, and completely without sentiment in every professional context. He answered on the second ring despite it being 2:47 in the morning, because that was part of the job. She fell asleep at the kitchen island, Seo-jin said, with her backpack on. Pause. Who did? Taeyong asked. Arya. Another pause. Longer. And you're calling me because... How do I move her without waking her? The silence on the other end of the phone was the loudest silence Seo-jin had experienced since his father's funeral. He could actually hear Taeyong processing the fact that the man who had once negotiated a hostage situation from a moving vehicle was calling him at 3 in the morning for parenting advice. You just... pick her up? Taeyong said slowly, as though explaining gravity to someone who had recently discovered it was optional. Support her head. Walk to the bedroom. Put her down. What if she wakes up? Then she's awake. That's not helpful, Taeyong. Boss. Careful pause. You have run this organization for 11 years. You once talked 3 armed men into putting down their weapons using only logic and mild intimidation. You can carry a sleeping child to her room. She still has the backpack on. Take the backpack off first. Seo-jin had taken the backpack off first. Arya had stirred, mumbled something in English that sounded like I already fed the cat. She did not own a cat, had never owned a cat, and the statement therefore raised more questions than it answered, and then settled back into sleep with the boneless confidence of someone who had decided, at a cellular level, that she was safe. That had been the strangest part. Not the logistics of carrying her. The way she had settled. Like a decision had been made somewhere below consciousness, quietly, without her permission or his. He had stood in the doorway of her room for longer than was strictly necessary. By 7 in the morning, Arya was awake, had located the kitchen, had identified that there was more cereal, and had helped herself with the self-sufficiency of a child who had spent a significant portion of her life figuring things out alone. Seojin found her on the kitchen stool, backpack mercifully not on this time, eating cereal and examining him with the focused assessment of a scientist who has discovered an unusual specimen and is deciding how to categorize it. "You look tired," she said. "Good morning," he said. "Did you sleep?" "Briefly." She nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. Then, "Do you have a housekeeper?" "Yes." "What's her name?" "Mrs. O." "Is she nice?" Seojin considered this honestly. Mrs. O was 61 years old, 4'11", and had been managing his household for 6 years with the iron efficiency of a woman who had decided that excellence was a moral position. She was not warm in the conventional sense. She was competent in the way that cathedrals are competent, structurally impeccable and mildly intimidating. "She is professional," he said diplomatically. Arya accepted this. Then, "What do I call you?" The question arrived without warning, the way Arya's questions tended to, slipped casually between spoonfuls of cereal like it wasn't the most loaded thing anyone had said to him in years. He sat down across from her. The kitchen island between them felt both enormous and insufficient. "What do you want to call me?" he asked. She thought about it with visible seriousness. "Not Dad," she said. "That's weird. We just met." "Fair." "Not Mr. Park. That's what my teachers are called." "Also fair." She tilted her head, looked at him with those eyes, his eyes, Simone's face, the universe's idea of a joke. "Can I call you Seojin?" "That is my name." "Okay, Seojin." She returned to her cereal. "Do you know how to make pancakes?" "No." "That's okay." She shrugged with the diplomatic generosity of someone lowering their expectations in real time. "We can learn together." Seojin looked at the small, practical, undefeated person sitting in his kitchen calling him by his first name and suggesting joint culinary education at 7 in the morning, and he felt something shift in his chest, tectonic, slow, and completely irreversible. He got up, found the flour, read the back of the packet, and Park Seojin, who ran 6 criminal operations across 3 districts, began learning to make pancakes. The first batch was a disaster. The second was debatable. The third Arya declared almost good, which, from a Bennett woman, he was already beginning to understand, was the highest available praise. 3 weeks after Yuna's exit, the penthouse had quietly, without anyone formally announcing it, begun to change. Small things first. Simone Bennett's photograph was back on the console table. Permanently. Seojin had placed it there himself and had said nothing about it, which in his personal communication style was equivalent to a strongly worded declaration. Mrs. O, 4'11" of professional excellence, had begun stocking the kitchen with cereal, fruit pouches, and the specific brand of apple juice that Arya had mentioned, once in passing, that she liked. Mrs. O did not do things in passing. She had written it down. Arya had also, somewhere in the 3rd week, stopped sleeping with her backpack beside the bed. Seojin noticed. He said nothing, but he noticed. What he did not notice, because he was a man who was very good at watching for threats from directions he expected, was the threat assembling itself from the direction he had dismissed. It started with a phone call he took in his study on a Tuesday morning, while Arya was in the living room engaged in a fierce negotiation with the television remote and a nature documentary she had not chosen but was now emotionally invested in. The call was from his older brother. Park Seo-won was 41, senior in the syndicate, and possessed of the particular brand of older brother energy that expressed itself not through warmth but through the consistent implication that every decision you had ever made was slightly incorrect. He had not called since Arya arrived. This was notable. Seo-won's silences were never passive. They were strategic. They were the silence of a man collecting information and waiting for the most efficient moment to deploy it. "Father wants to meet her," Seo-won said without preamble. Seojin's hand tightened on the phone. "No, that wasn't a request, Seojin. It was a courtesy notification." "Then I'm courtesy notifying you back." No. Pause. You brought an illegitimate child into this family without consultation. Did you imagine there would be no response? She is not illegitimate. She is my daughter. That distinction, Seo-won said pleasantly, is exactly what father wants to discuss. The call ended. Seo-jin sat in his study for a long moment. Through the closed door, he could hear Arya telling the television documentary that the cheetah was definitely going to catch the gazelle and it should just accept this. She sounded very certain. She sounded like her mother. He picked up the phone and called Taeyong. I need eyes on my father's movements, he said. Starting now. Pause. How serious? Serious enough that I'm asking. That was all Taeyong needed. The second thing happened 4 days later. Arya came home from her first week at the international school, an arrangement Seo-jin had made quietly, efficiently, and with a level of logistical precision usually reserved for operations involving significantly higher stakes, though he was beginning to revise his definition of stakes, and she was quiet in a way that was different from her usual quiet. Arya's normal quiet was busy, observational. It processed things and filed them and occasionally produced conclusions that arrived sideways and landed directly in the center of a conversation. This quiet was smaller, pulled inward. She ate dinner. She answered his questions with the minimum viable words. She went to her room. Seo-jin waited 20 minutes. Then he knocked. Come in. She was sitting on her bed, still in her school uniform, holding her mother's photograph. The small one she kept on her nightstand, separate from the console table one, because Arya Bennett believed in redundancy when it came to things that mattered. Someone at school, she said before he could ask, said I don't have a real family. The room temperature dropped approximately 4 degrees. Or perhaps that was just Seo-jin. Which student? He asked, very quietly. Doesn't matter. It matters to me. Arya looked up at him. Then she looked back at the photograph. She said that people like me, she paused, choosing words with the careful precision of someone who has been hurt and is trying to describe the shape of it without reopening it, don't belong in families like yours. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in Seoul. Seo-jin crossed the room, sat beside her on the bed, said nothing for a moment because some things deserve the dignity of silence before the response. Then, she is wrong. How do you know? Because, he said, you are sitting in my home eating my terrible pancakes, calling me by my first name, and your mother's photograph is on my console table. He paused. That is a family. It does not look like other families, but it is one. Arya considered this with characteristic seriousness. Then, your pancakes are getting better. Marginally. Like a 6 out of 10 now. Last week I was a 4. Progress, she said, and leaned, just slightly, against his arm. Outside the penthouse, 43 floors below, a black car had been parked on the same street for 3 days. The driver had not moved. The plates were registered to a company that did not exist. Taeyong had already photographed them. He sent the image to Seo-jin at 11:47 that night with one message. Your father's men. They've been watching the school. The black car disappeared on a Thursday. That was the problem. Taeyong called at 6:14 in the morning, while Seo-jin was standing in the kitchen watching toast, actual toast, because Arya had declared last Tuesday that a grown man who could only make cereal and bad pancakes was, quote, a culinary tragedy, and the call came with the specific tone Taeyong reserved for information that required immediate sitting down. The car is gone. Since when? Sometime between 2 and 4 this morning. No footage. Someone cut the building's external cameras. Seo-jin put the toast down. All of them. Just the east-facing ones. Pause that carried weight. The school-facing ones. The kitchen was very quiet. Arya doesn't go to school today, Seo-jin said. Already arranged. I called the school at 6. Family emergency. Good. There's more. Taeyong hesitated, and Taeyong did not hesitate. Hesitation was not in his professional vocabulary, which made this particular hesitation feel like a fire alarm in a library. Your brother called our operations office this morning. Not your private line. The operations office. He asked for a formal meeting. Today. Said it was about the child's legal status in Korea. Legal status. 2 words dressed in suits, carrying briefcases, smiling politely while they dismantled everything. Seo-jin understood immediately what his father was doing. This was not confrontation. Confrontation was beneath Park Seo-won's methodology. This was architecture. His father was building a structure, legal, social, institutional, designed to make Area's presence in Seoul untenable, illegitimate, challengeable, not with violence, with paperwork, with the slow, suffocating legitimacy of a system that his family had spent decades learning to operate like a private instrument. It was, Seo-jin thought grimly, genuinely impressive. He would have admired it if it wasn't aimed at a 7-year-old who gave pancakes a 6 out of 10 and slept with her mother's photograph. He was still thinking when Arya appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, hair escaping its braids in 17 directions, looking at the abandoned toast with scientific interest. "You burned it," she said. "I did not. It's smoking, Seo-jin." It was, in fact, smoking. He removed it from the toaster. Arya climbed onto her stool and watched him with the patient expression of someone who had expected this outcome and was being gracious about it. "Am I going to school today?" she asked. He looked at her. This small, perceptive, entirely undefeated person who had packed her own suitcase at 2 in the morning and still gave credit where credit was due on pancake improvement. "Not today," he said. She studied his face the way she studied everything. Quietly, thoroughly, missing nothing. "Is something wrong?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Not for long," he said. And he picked up his phone and called the one person in Seoul his father had never been able to predict, outmaneuver, or intimidate. His mother. Park Seo-jin's mother arrived at the penthouse at 9:17 in the morning wearing a cream hanbok, carrying homemade doenjang jjigae in a sealed container, and radiating the specific energy of a woman who had already decided how this situation was going to end before she walked through the door. Park Yun-hee was 63 years old, small, silver-haired, and the only human being alive who could make Seo-jin stand up straighter simply by entering a room. She had raised 2 sons inside a criminal empire without losing either her posture or her principles, which was, by any reasonable measure, the most impressive operation the Park family had ever run. She walked in. She saw Arya. She stopped. Arya, sitting at the kitchen island with her mother's photograph propped beside her cereal bowl. Because she had started doing that, bringing it to breakfast quietly, like including Simone in the morning. Looked up at the small, elegant woman and said, with complete sincerity, "Good morning. Are you important?" Yun-hee looked at Seo-jin. Seo-jin looked at the ceiling. "Yes," Yun-hee said in careful English. "I am his mother." Arya considered this seriously. "He burns toast," she said. "Just so you know." "I know," Yun-hee said. "He has burned toast since he was 12. And just like that, without negotiation, without formal introduction, without any of the careful architecture that adults construct around difficult situations. Something settled between them. Simple, solid, real. Yun-hee sat beside Arya. She opened the container of jjigae. She explained every ingredient in slow, patient Korean while Arya listened with the focused attention she gave everything that mattered. Seo-jin stood in the kitchen doorway and watched his mother teach his daughter the name for fermented soybean paste. And he understood, with a clarity that bypassed logic entirely, that his father had already lost. Park Seo-won's legal maneuver collapsed within a week. Yun-hee had made 3 phone calls. Nobody discussed what was said in those calls. Nobody needed to. Park Yun-hee had 63 years of knowing exactly where every body was buried metaphorically, and in 2 cases rather literally, and she deployed that knowledge with the precision of a woman who had been patient long enough. Area's legal status in Korea was formalized. Permanent residency. Park family documentation. Every I dotted in the particular ink that meant untouchable. Seo-won did not call again. On a Saturday morning 6 weeks later, Arya sat at the kitchen island and watched Seojin produce pancakes that were, by her official assessment, an 8 out of 10. That's basically perfect, he said. It's an 8, she said. 10 means perfect. What would make it a 10? She thought about it, head tilted, her mother's photograph beside her cereal bowl catching the morning light. If my mom could taste them, she said quietly. The kitchen was still. Seojin set down the spatula, sat beside her, looked at the photograph. Simone Bennett, bright-eyed, one hand on her hip, grinning like she knew something the world didn't. She can, he said. You taste them for her. Arya looked at him. Something moved across her face. Grief and gratitude arriving together, the way they always do when love is big enough to hold both. Then she picked up her fork. Okay, she said. Then it's a 9. What happened to 10? You still burn the toast. He laughed. A real one. The kind that surprised him. Unfamiliar in his own chest, like a room he hadn't opened in years, full of light. Outside, Soul moved and hummed and didn't notice. But inside the 43rd floor penthouse, a little girl who had packed her own suitcase at 2 in the morning and begged to go home had found, without planning it, without asking for it, exactly that. Home. Not the Atlanta kind. Not the kind with Aunt Renee's coconut oil couch and cereal for dinner Tuesdays. A new kind. Built from burned toast, 9 out of 10 pancakes, a photograph on a console table, and a man who had burned cities learning, slowly and imperfectly, to tend something small and irreplaceable instead. And if you believe every child deserves to be protected, loved, and chosen, hit subscribe. Because only someone exactly like Choi Yuno would scroll past without doing it.